Hello, this is Lisa Lee, and welcome to this week's enrichment reading. I'm really excited for what we're doing. So we've been in the Akashic records looking at dominant myths, we've just been futzing around in the Akashic records, and it's brought us to dominant myths because the questions that I asked just kind of led me into a wing of that. It's funny when I use the term Akashic records, and it's always funny to me when I even talk about like the deity field, because my site, my vision, which I share like freely, because I think everybody has access to this stuff. I really do. But I have just kind of like a quirk of chemistry, right? And when I see all of these places, to me, there's a religious syncretism that's taking place that is kind of like amazing, in the sense that like I recognize the deity plane as one that it's all symbolic language and story structure that like we fill in with what we can kind of conceive of. But those story structures, those archetypes, are deities in and of themselves. Like we are born like quite literally like moving through these stories. And so I'm seeing something cool happen with humanity, and I'm seeing something cool happen with the consciousness of the earth. And we're in some kind of a moment right now. I really do believe that like the figure eight, there's my like fingers, the figure eight, like you see how it comes into a pinch point in the middle with the 8. That is, I think we're in the pinch point. I think we're going from like almost like a funnel. There seems to be something happening celestial, like in a celestial way. And all of the creatures of the ecosystem of the spiritual world are kind of like, there's stuff going on. I'm like noticing it. So, when I kind of speak of the Akashic records, I'm borrowing a term used by another psychic to describe like the phenomenon of there seems to be like a celestial or like a terrestrial, there's a place that if you're doing this kind of work, you can kind of like move into. There's like an ascended repository. And so it doesn't have to be the perfect word. It doesn't even have to, the structure of somewhere that these things exist. And then the funnel that we move our like consciousness through and call it a library, for lack of a better way of putting it. It's not an exact match, but it's symbolism, right? And so I've been seeing a lot going on in like celestial realms, where this notion of like tribal beliefs has to kind of give way to a bigger picture that says like we're in a ecosystem, that ecosystem is closed, there are fields within that ecosystem, and the information coming from the upper planes is in a language that we don't speak. We get the symbols, that the story structures that we fit our consciousness, which is limited, into, and then we have to sort of like read between these. It's a collaborative, co-creative sort of process with the aboves and the belows, with spirit, that helps us sort of see the bigger picture of the body that we're in. And so, when I think about things like disclosure, what I'm thinking about is the deity plane, which can also be called an alien plane. I mean, this is where the syncretism is important, because it's angels, deities, aliens, these are planes of existence. And then we also have like terrestrials, and there are fields. They're like fields, even like the field of your magnetic field, or the field of your heart. You know what I mean? Like there are these actual literal fields that we all participate in and through. And the complexity and the kaleidoscope just gives us this notion of like, it's not about being deterministic. It's not about being right or wrong. We're not like pulling into this like, parking spot and like dictating to the universe what we see and what we know and what is right and what is wrong. And then we have to, be the police of all of that. Like the old worldview and like everything that brought us, to this place with is going the way of, it's gonna be a multi-dimensional. I'm getting way ahead of myself. I'm saying all of this to sort of, I don't want to say qualify where we're going, but with the dominant myths, we're doing a really interesting thing in the way of spiritual warfare. We are identifying that these stories, in this particular law of attraction, laughter, and crown, our guides just like told me to cool it with is Aquarius. They're like, you're getting so ahead of yourself. You get so interested in all of the things that we look at, and then you try to share as much of it as humanly possible, and as like, and they're saying with as little breath as possible. And so they're kind of slowing me down to say, you know, I'm bringing in the excitement of what I see going on with this veil thinning, aka whatever someone else might call it, like disclosure, or like this point in history where we're like, this is really big, where something's moving in. Something really amazing is going to sort of like, we're going to have to reckon with something really incredible here. And when we look at the stories and the relationship that we have to the stories that are going away, they're actual relationships, and those are actual deities that we've served with our lives and we've been informed by. Whatever this, it's a wing of the Akashic records where these dominant myths are communicating with me as deities themselves with their own voice, and that story is wants to enter the world with these souls. And that's why we ended up in womb world. I mean, I asked a question to, you know, an energy that sort of is like a librarian, and this is how we ended up here. But we are reckoning with these dominant myths as if they are gods that we're having to sort of work our way through their story arc with our lives and come out in a new place. And so we're saying goodbye, but we're also saying hello to a new incarnation of like, I don't know yet. We're going to find out. And so let's jump in like kind of there. I mean, I feel bad with the long preambles, but I'm excited about where we're going. You know, in my head, I'm thinking that like, it looks really chaotic. It looks really, you know, I'm seeing the moon card, like illusions and delusions out there in the world right now, because with the old stories falling apart and people, you know, there's a lot of people out there trying to sell a new story. You know, like sell it to the highest bidder, and then like now it can like, you know, amass. These are new energies that want to come into form, and take those structures and like work with people. And how you align with these stories is again like how you interpret the symbols that are coming out of these fields. The stories that you align with are just how you're interpreting those symbols, and where you are in the greater story. And so when I went into the Akashic records with very specific sort of questions in terms of the dominant myth we're formed by, that is martyr-savior myth, because I thought that like, okay, certainly we are like in a relationship and reckoning with that God, because I come back to it every like couple of weeks. And we are working with the Greek pantheon in this moment as well, which is like an interesting twist, because they're here for this. They're here they're here for the breakthrough on stories as gods, because they're saying that's a really important one in terms of coherence for the collective. And so the first thing that we're looking at is like, when I opened this file on the martyr-savior myth, it was huge. I was like really overwhelmed by just how many people have lived and died, you know, serving that story with their lives, like being that, like the savior, the whole story of like taking the place and being the Christ in the world. Like it was a huge file, this martyr savior story, but it wasn't just about that dominant myth with that religion. I also saw it in terms of how people like interpreted love. Like, I give my life for you. I serve your life with my life. It was really interesting. And so the first thing that I wanted to come in on with our collective's like relationship to this energy, the martyr savior myth, is that like a lot of us are coming in from this like living as a representative of the savior. And we're starting with that as like the burden, and like, what does that mean? Because martyr and savior, like these are, it's a weird archetype, but it's an enormous folder basically, or not even, it's like a filing system. And living as savior in life is very interesting too, because it does entail entering the story at helpless and being abandoned and needing saving, and like there's a betrayal built in there too. And so the structure that the Greek pantheon is giving me in terms of like the way that we're gonna like go into this story to try and properly understand it is, they said like, you know, of this enormous file that can, you know, basically serve to discuss a million relationships, you're gonna take the movements and my first chakra is acting up. it's hard to explain. But we're going to take the movements, the pivots, those contractual points of the story, like, and we're going to break it down, and then we're going to apply it, like, and we're going to call forth like the information related to this collective's participation with that story. And so we've got the burden, the sacrifice, the betrayal, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the salvation, the ascension, the revelation, and the kingdom as being these movements, these pivot points, these bullets, you know. And so we enter that archetypal story at the movement or the position of the burden. And so when we look at what this burden is, you know, like at a glance, at a very, very quick glance, we're seeing you come into the world as a little baby, and you have a lot of love that you want to give, a lot of that you want to share, a lot that you want to express, like very big hearted, probably even a big personality. And then for Pentacles, you're left with like the bare minimum of care. And so like heavy neglect, something came through, and I don't know if I like where I mentioned it or like how it channeled through or like what. It's something that's been like coming up, and I've been saying it, and it's so I think it might be channeled through, but it could come from somewhere. You know, the rate at which I process information, like I have to be careful about stuff like that. But I'm also like mostly sure that I coined this term, and it's autistic deprivation. And autistic deprivation is something that like I can recognize, like, you know, like with the backdrop of like certain disabilities and so on and so forth. But I think that this exists for like neurodivergence. I think that this exists for born witches, people born with magic, people born with multiple types of sight, who are more spiritual than material. And so what I call autistic deprivation, it's like a hallmark. If you are born with a diagnosis that isn't like properly understood, and people misunderstand you, and so you're constantly being misread and misinterpreted and projected upon, like the core of who you are and what it is for you to go through life is one of having been like that rejected stone. Like I'm seeing the cornerstone rejected. You're rejected in your authentic expression, like right out the gate by notable non-compliant differences. And so you're then forced to be in deprivation, meaning no matter what the attention that comes to you is, because it's a misinterpretation of you and a projection of you, you're receiving it and like in a position that says like, I have to, like, how do I put this? People not wanting to see you right over and over again and refusing you like your authentic expression, like because they can't conceive of or comprehend your position, that like level of sight. That's going to give you like a sense of deprivation that's going to make you seek spirit as your primary influence. And so that here with the Five of Swords being about like, that's in a lot of competition with all the dominant views. And especially if you're entering into this story, what you're kind of given to work with in that deprivation of not being seen, not being understood, having to be pushed toward spirit and the spirit realm and communication with the spirit realm in order to get your sustenance. Ultimately, it means you belong to spirit. You're adopted by spirit. You're spirit's child. It's almost like I want to say the word changeling. You belong to your people, and they're not really this people, right? And so that deprivation of being in a world where you belong to another world, and your sustenance is coming from another world, means that you're kind of blind. There's kind of a blindness that comes in about what it is to be who you are, and knowing who you are, then authentically like know how to, like where desire is operation. I know who desire is operational. I know who I am, and I know what I want because I know who I am. But when you're denied who you are, then it becomes, I know what I want, which is to be accepted, and seeking the spirit realm to meet my needs because I don't belong necessarily to this world. I am then seeking a spiritual answer to acceptance, and that means that I'm operating through stories in even a more profound way, falling in love with stories really falling in love with stories though. And like, this is where limerence comes in, and this is where like projecting on another a story that they're not in, you know, comes in, because you are heavily interacting with the spirit realm, but the stories that you're sort of weaving with are between worlds, and they're not rooted in the experience that you're having in this world. They're rooted in like your access to another world. And all of the energy there, and it can be very confusing. It is extraordinarily confusing, because that Four of Cups here says that you're constantly falling in love or like being enraptured by, well, it's a lot of things. You know, you can like reality pales in comparison. The reality of the experience like leaves you at a level of deprivation, because you're experiencing yourself primarily from a spiritual place. And so the what I would call the rational experience of an interaction like isn't really informed. Ooh, my throat chakra is acting up so hard. I'm going to take that as a signal to get more cards, because I'm getting a little bit lost right here. But what I do know about this Five of Swords is the reason why this is such a fight to the finish is because you're seeking to get your needs met through like story form, like with living actors almost. And when that fails, and this is this part of the Akashic record. So where we're entering the story at the burden is not going to be like where you are right now in terms of your ascended sort of sense of things. This is going to be when you're young and when you're coming into the world and you're like, this is who I am, this is how I operate, what does it mean to get my needs met? Well, it like all of the conditioning and the training of getting your needs met would have been seeking out spirit in childhood. And so adulthood in practice, this is really confusing. And so that means that your mode of operating, even if it might even be called like, you know, like I'm trying to find the right word for it, because it can be, what the heck is that? There's a word for a type. It's Walter Mitty is the story that I'm being shown. Like I'm being shown the movie Walter Mitty. It's a story Walter Mitty, and I don't know what that disorder is called, and I'm trying to get it because they're telling me it's not a disorder, and I've been seeing this lately with disassociation. That disassociation is a spiritual tool that like it like pops into like operation when you're in trauma as a way of shielding you, but it has like a million other spiritual technology like aspects. It has like magic, like you can use it. Same thing with denial. Like these are two things like that are useful. But so there's something called like distracted daydreaming, or what is that? Like disassociated daydreaming. Well, they keep on saying it's not just there is a clinical name for it, but they're saying that doesn't work in adult life. And then what is your toolbox in terms of like fully experiencing and enjoying like the actual rational reality of a situation? Like it's almost like you live in a colorful world that is informed by so many spiritual influences, but then your experience of day-to-day life is left out. So you're included, but left out. So there's this really interesting thing that I'm seeing here in terms of the Four of Cups. And so Spirit is saying, yes, get more cards because you're getting closer to the truth. This is like this message. But I'm excited, like really, really excited about trying to share everything that I've seen, because I think we're at a cool moment in this, in the transformation of the earth. And like people are going to go one of two ways. They're either going to bicker and fight about who's right or wrong, and because stories are suddenly going to go like slip slidey, and like we're going to lose our faith in, yeah, they're saying all of our guys are like, you're going to go on a weird tangent, leave it. There's a lot going on, but there's ways in which we can interpret it. And if we interpret it right, it's a happy, exciting time of discovery. So we're going to try to interpret it right ultimately. So with this Aquarius, the dawning of the age of Aquarius, like we're moving into Aquarius, the law of attraction, laughter, and crown. This is about like coming into who you truly are and what you truly are, and like the promise of this of getting from the shadow aspect of this myth and into the light aspect of this myth. The release or the liberation here is one where it's like it's going to bring your spirit up. And you're going to kind of know that knowing of who you are, like at your spiritual inheritance, your spiritual identity. That's what's going on there. So let's take a look. The scholar, investigation, and research. That's us. This is this collective. All right. Radical changes. New influences and wanderlust. And so, you know, I don't totally understand, you know, the significance of the story as Spirit just showed us, you know, where we're kind of like entering into the shadow of this archetypal story, this relationship with this archetypal story. Now, everyone has a different story with the way that they relate to the martyr-savior myth. But this is the group that, like, for all intents and purposes, when push comes to shove, they go all the way. This is the we go all the way with the heart thing. When you give your love to someone, it's an all the way. When you believe in something and it's right and it's wrong, you fight for right, you know, all the way. You know, so it's an all in. Like when a dream inspires you, you go all in. And so it's a lot of like depth of field because you go all the way in with the love and then the heartbreak creates that much void. So that's the depth in which you operate in terms of like how you can see. And so when we look at, so this is going to be a group, and it's a group with like magical thinking. And every single time I say magical thinking, I kind of want to correct false use of those words and say that like magical thinking is how we begin to like really engage with our magic. That if a story has to be true, and if we expect a transaction out of our spiritual participation, that's a failing situation right there. That's not how all that stuff needs to let go. But if we enter into it as working our way through the relationship of the archetype, of the story, of the myth that we were born to reckon with our, in relationship with our existence and our perception. When you understand that the mind of God expands with its creation as it creates new perspectives based on the lives that are lived through the stories that it creates, like there's something much bigger going on here in terms of like where we're going with coherence. And so this is actually kind of like a big deal. And so allowing yourself to participate with what you naturally are was always going to be the hardest part of like the shadow of the martyr savior is that the savior archetype first enters the world needing saving. The martyr becomes a martyr because the cause is worth it's like his or her life in one way or another. And that's why I saw this file was so huge. Like even like with, it comes up, there's a huge portion of this record that is like mother, martyr, savior. The mother who dies for her child because it is a worthy exchange. And it's on the axis of love. So this is like a huge file. This is a huge dominant myth. And there are shadow aspects and there are light aspects that enrich our, the burden enriches, and so like our burden, coming in with this story around this notion of deprivation and being in it, not seen, refuse to see you. You're going to be on the margins. You have to seek, you're not in the dominant, I don't know how else to explain it. You're going to be the one that shows up as the martyr or the savior in one way or another until the shadow aspect of that myth fails you. The belief in you put your heart into it and then it comes true. You love with all of your heart and then that person loves you back. You bet your life on it and it works out. Like it has to fail. And so this is going to be one of the hardest burdens to come in with a story like this, to reckon with and give perspective to God with. One of the hardest ones. And your guides give you so much love. This is a collective and a school of fish that has to give it all for nothing at a certain point. And I don't mean that as you can wait for that to happen. It's going to happen. No, it's already happened. You know what I mean? This collective is not, this isn't your future. You're going to get it. No, this is, you've already, because of the nature of you put it all in, you put your whole heart in, you put your whole might in, you put all your brain, you go in with every ounce of enthusiasm. Think of the most enthusiastic person that you've ever, I want you to picture the most enthusiastic person that, like, anyone that you can picture, and then and dial the enthusiasm all the way up and do it from a pure heart in a beautiful place. I want you to dial that knob all the way up on the enthusiasm, and I want you to look at that person, and I want you to hold that little picture in your mind. How hard is it for you to disappoint that person now? What would it mean for you to now go up to them and say, I hate to disappoint you? What is the depth of grief now that is that character's expression? You're changing this now. The knob of enthusiasm all the way up. To disappoint that enthusiasm, where's that knob going to go? All the way down. That's a huge depth of field. That's how much love this collective brings in for the world. And they are yet rejected. They have to be in order to to overcome, to bring perspective to that part of the story that then like allows us to all move into an ascended point. That sacrifice, that savior, my sacrifice, that I come into this story to give God this perspective, then saves all those who like would fall into the margins of this shadow. It's a really hard myth. And it also is something that we worship. We worship that sacrifice of love. Even if it's not in the savior martyr story, the fact that the story is like, I filing boxes, I mean, this story went on and on so far, I couldn't even subcategorize. I thought I was going to subcategorize, not a chance, not a chance. So when we have this investigation research and, you know, when you are pushed out, and I see this, somebody has the Disney Channel and National Geographic, and there's something about animals, and I think it's baby animals, maybe. Baby animals, if you want to traumatize yourself, if you want to go into, I have to take some water. If you want to go into like DEFCON trauma mode, watch Baby Animals, because it's about baby animals coming into on this earth and what it means for them to endure. And there is this story of the monkey, the little baby monkey who's an orphan. That is this archetype. And if you want to go through the shadow and the healing with your guides on that story, it can be transformative. There is a lot there. But it shows up in nature. It's this myth, this dominant story, and playing itself out. This is a spirit. This is an energy born within like even the animal kingdom, with energies that are working it out at that level of consciousness and perspective for the purpose of the vantage point of coherence for the whole. And so, you know, this makes you a seeker. This makes you an investigator. This forces you to look outside yourself and inside of yourself. Everybody's forced to look outside themselves at, you know, various levels. But those who are excluded, exiled, socially exiled, a little bit somehow, and this is not about, you are not deserving of this. This is the story that is happening somehow. And that exile doesn't mean you're not rejected and exiled. You know, this is not like a referendum on you. This is something in childhood, some experience of othering that left such a mark. And it could have been, and it could be a theme that you're still living out. It doesn't matter. It's, this story is like really, is a hallmark in this collective's development around this myth. And so it forces you to say, who is God if this is my life? How am I not like loved by the divine? I have to find the divine, and the divine's going to answer for this. We're going to, you know, why do I have this horrible burden, you know, of like not being seen or understood clearly, or being forced to like, you know, adhere to I'm seeing a caste, like a caste that was made for you, that you have to now be formed by, like, you know, nope, who you are isn't enough or right. You change, you know, alter, fix it. It has to work for this system that we're putting you in. And so you can't be that. So there's a rejection that I think everyone experiences because of the patriarchy, and it's like, you know, horrible, evil. But there's also something here that, like, you know, this story has to work out through the shadow. And so with ambition and setbacks, this ambition, this inspiration and being inspired to live. So womb world formed by interactions with stories. This is like, for whatever reason, the depth of field on this is important with this collective, because this is a group where that enthusiasm is dialed all the way up. And so that's where like your ambition is going to be all the way. Your ambition for a love story, the whole thing, or nothing at all. You know what I mean? Like your ambition to like have, like to move into these, to fall in love with these stories, to be in relationship to these stories and formed by them, like is a all the way. You're an all the way kind of a person. And then that means that life, like the shadow end of that is life is so disappointing. People are so unsafe. There is nothing redeeming. Because the expectation, the anticipation, like it's so much that enthusiasm is all the way, and therefore that disappointment is like conclusive. Like we're, you know, no question left. Like it's all 10 swords to bring that. That's how bad. And so when we have this discovery of like what it means to let go of the conclusions we've been given by the experiences that we've had, instead of allying with the message that is relayed by them, that's the shadow end of the story, relays this message that says you are rejected by everyone and everything, including God. My God, why have you forsaken me? You have been forsaken. God will forsake you. Like that's a crazy thing, right? But we're talking about the nuts and bolts of an archetypal story that is repeated to us over and over and over and over again. It's repeated to us if it's given to us to believe, but it's also repeated to us about what other people believe, and it's repeated to us about the world that we believe that we're, you know, governed by. Repeated. So this is an abusive relationship, right in the shadow. This is an abusive relationship with yourself. Because with this story, you start to deny yourself in service of something that, like, to get in, to be accepted, to be worthy of acceptance. That's where to be worthy of being accepted is where the savior archetype comes in. I am going to be worthy of being accepted because I represent everyone who is forgotten, and I'm going to save them. I'm going to show up and save the ones who are being mistreated, because I was mistreated. Even if it cost me my life. My life isn't worth anything. I was taught that when I was young. And so now I'm going to prove that my life is worth something, because it's worth something to God and divinity, because I sought out God and divinity, because I wasn't going to get it from my day-to-day reality. And I sought out God and divinity through the stories that I was given, and I did it all the way. And when I did it all the way, I found out I was loved. I found out I was valued. And now I have to save everyone else from what happened to me. And my life doesn't matter. That's that initial shadow, unless I give my life for something greater. Then it'll matter. So it's a big story. We can fixate on it. And the bad thing about that is that there's always going to be somebody who's going to take your life, who's willing to take your life. You're willing to give it, they're willing to take it. And you're not necessarily, there doesn't necessarily come that point when your saving someone is appreciated. The stone that was rejected then becomes worshipped. That's not a part of the structure. And so life can be a series of horrendous disappointments where all of the enthusiasm is then met by all of the disappointment. And then the conclusion drawn with this 5 of Swords is like, there's no place for me here. I'm just going to subsist. And so with the discovery, aspect, where the seeking then leads to this discovery that you are worth something, that there is some other realm, there's many realms out there, that you're part of something much bigger, that you're an important perspective in the whole and the development and the relationship, and that there is more than meets the eye, and there is a bigger picture, and there are deities, and there is a God, and there are creatures from other realms, planets, fields. We're never alone, and there's such a richness of participation in the jungle of life for us. Our consciousness is witnessed. So we discover that, but that's really at odds with whether or not we're going to get accepted for the parties, in the reality-based world that we're in. Are we going to get accepted for the relationships that give status when that's a game that you play or you don't play, but you certainly don't show up there and then evacuate for the stories that mean something to you? Because that's the realm and the land that you know what it is to feel alive in. And then there's guilt and suffering around whether or not you're having a quality of life because you've been driven out of life and now you've made do with sustenance. And is that making do with sustenance some kind of failure? You know, this is this burden. I mean, there's a kind of a lot here. But with that opposition to your growth, and with the way that you grow around that opposition and are informed by other influences, because those that are withheld you were never meant to be a part of your story. That's why they were withheld. And so with this catalyst, this radical changes and taking control and new influences and wanderlust, we enter in with this burden of some form of like core rejection in order to like work with this story. And so we're going to move into the next question, which is like the sacrifice, you know, so that means that, you know, where this collective is, and let me just move this stuff around a little bit, where this collective is and like where we kind of like go into this story with that burden. It means that something had to be sacrificed. Now, what had to be sacrificed? Was it the love story that was going to make everything all better? And it really didn't. You know, was it the role that was going to get you the credit and the validation of like what you're creating? Or, you know, even if you get it, there's some horrible side effects like jealousy in people. What else is there? Like, you know, there's something that you gave everything for. There was some sacrifice that took place of something that you, enthusiasm all the way up. And it's probably more than one thing. And so but here's where this story is interesting and what it means to interact with the story that is like interesting. The sacrifice is basically, it's necessary for everything else that comes after it. It's necessary for the betrayal, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the salvation, the ascension, the revelation, the kingdom. That whole line comes after the sacrifice. So what you have to sacrifice and the betrayal and the crucifixion that goes with that process, if you stop there, if that's like the last stop on the train of you like participating in life, because that's it, the enthusiasm was all the way up, the life force was all the way given, and then the promise or what you were supposed to sort of receive didn't happen. The betrayal of God at that moment, when you know you were innocent and good and right, and how can this betrayal of like what you're supposed to deserve because you're loved by God then be, but then a crucifixion of like that false belief system, that false, that agenda that wasn't meant for you, that situation, that hope, that dream. And that's a very painful experience. And so we're going to look at that string of things here with this story so that we can sort of understand that it's so important to move beyond that. Because if you're in this story and you're living through this story and you're reckoning with this deity, then your inheritance is the rest of the story. And so it's very important for us to not end up in the underworld of that 3 days. So that's where that 3 days represents the transformation. So, all right, let's get into it. Let's look at it. Let's take a look. See if there's anything else here. This initiation here, like every single one of these movements entails a new initiation. And so where we enter at the burden is all your heart, kind of. But it's gonna enter at like having to seek out answers because everything was insufficient and that deprivation was painful. Aspiring with the most enthusiasm ever to sort of get your needs met in this way, and then discovering that nothing that you were told was going to pan out that way, and this need for change because the story that like makes you feel alive in competition with the reality that was always never been leaves you in kind of a void space. So this is this burden with that Four of Cups. And And so to get to this place of new influences and wanderlust, this is like wanting to live, wanting to participate with life, wanting to step into that resurrection, that salvation, that ascension, that revelation, and that kingdom kind of a space. That's your inheritance on the other side of this. So let's take a look and take a look at this notion of sacrifice, betrayal, and crucifixion. These are each individual movements, and I want to kind of do each one of them individually, but I feel like I'll kill you guys with time if I do that. The womb and the warrior. Okay, so this is this next phase. And I'm actually going to move these other cards out because we did them pretty thoroughly. Yeah, this is this way. I'm like, wait a minute. So this stone is like, this is going to be like the shadow end of the story where the burden where you're like, I'm willing to give it all, you know, gives way to the sacrifice of, no, that didn't work out. And the pain of that crucifixion. My God, why have you forsaken me? You were supposed to love me. That was supposed to be the answer to nobody else does. And I was supposed to become important by way of everything that I gave. And this is not that. This story sucks, right? And it can create the stone where the hurt is so great. It's so heavy. It's so profound. The disappointment so like ubiquitous that there's nothing else left to want, to think about, to hope for. It's just done. It's over. Like, and you can do one of two things in that position. You have, like, you can start, like, you know, that sacrifice, what needs to be let go of, you know, in order for you to sort of like be able to meet the world again. And relationship is important and be seen clearly. And so, you know, we go into this next part of it and like, you know, it's almost like we're not even going to focus on the sacrifice, the betrayal, and the crucifixion, because you know that too well. That's what most of this channel is talking about in one way or another. Like, you know, we go over it. We go over it over and over again. And so this next part of this reading, in terms of like them, like moving through these things, is reckoning with the loss, and that's going to be your grief. That's going to be, you have to have a funeral. That's going to be, you have to process it. That's going to be, you have to understand, you know, why, like, how come, you know, what's the purpose of spirituality if it doesn't make it better? What's the purpose of a God if something horrible happens? And that's transactional, and then we have to work our way through it. That's a wrestling with the divine that we all have to do. It's part of our initiation from the burden, you know, into the resurrection. And so, you know, with the stone being like, I don't even want to go anywhere. I don't even know what to do. I'm just like down. I'm down for the count. I'm finished. I'm too tired. I've tried too many times, and now I'm gonna do, like, I'm gonna revert back to just spending the majority of my time, like, using my, because this is the group that has spiritual gifts and has the influence and the upbringing of spirit guides. You're more spirit than rational. And I don't mean that to say you're irrational, but like, I'm trying to, these two worlds, like the material, I'll call it the material. You're more spiritual than material. That's your home, and that's the way that you should be. But that doesn't mean that you like exit. You're supposed to be experiencing this life with those energies around you and in relationship to those energies, much more so than any, you know, than people who don't operate like that, because of the collective that you're in. And that collective has a job with that kind of sight and that kind of immersion into spirit. That's why that burden is there. That's why the sacrifice of, you know, what you thought you wanted in the way of a life was going to give way to the authentic experience of the life created for you through, around who you really are. And so you're a bunch of story archetypes that are experiencing themselves in relationship to this story archetype, and that expansion of sight, and then the beautiful ecosystem of your ancestors grow through you, and like the influence of the divine through their ascension and all of this. And so your ascension, you're picking yourself up, you're resurrecting, that perspective that you bring in also goes to your ancestors. There is a savior aspect to this that is like, you are the way, the light. when you connect with the divine, the way and the light. And so like there is a part of this ascension, you know, looking at this archetype and looking at the shadow aspect and being like, I need to get to that light aspect. I need to ascend with this. And to do that, I have to let go of the crucifixion. I cannot stand here looking at myself hanging on that cross, screaming to God, you betrayal, the betrayal. Look at them. How, you're letting those, what? You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine if Jesus didn't die? And just really was just cursing each and every one of the people looking at him and telling them just what God thought of them for being the way that they are and the position that they're taking and how dare they, and like refused to let the crucifixion die and that story go to over. That story ending needed to end. That crucifixion needed to happen. That allowance had to be, that there had to be a forgiveness of the situation in order to step into the resurrection. And so, you know, for you to be seen clearly, you have to forgive that you haven't been seen clearly. For you to be in a relationship where you are understood and valued and properly like related to, like you have to forgive a lot of what it means to have had that go wrong so many times. To get out of this stone and prepare for a relationship, you have to want relationship. And, you know, like you have to break free from any kind of limerent pattern that puts all of your hope, enthusiasm dialed all the way up on someone else, that like you're having faith that that individual or that specific story or that specific job, it has to come out like that. It has to be that person. It has to be that job, and it has to be that home, and it has to be that car, and it has to be those kids. This is the worst. This is going to lead to, with that enthusiasm all the way up being who you are, to like an experience of depth of field related to that sacrifice, and that story has to be sacrificed for the reality of the experience that you're meant to have. That like falling in love with the archetype of that story that wasn't meant for you. Like you have to be able to sort of like plan for what it means to have the story that's meant for you and the people that are meant for you and the experience that are meant for you meet you. And that creator here is like asking that you like are able to forgive the crucifixion. That's the stone. There's a crucifixion leaves you dead. The crucifixion leaves the heart a stone. Like think about what is dead. It's a stone. It's a plank. It's a board. If you've ever seen a dead body, it doesn't have any life in it. It's a piece of wood. And so that Two of Wands and that Two of Cups, you know, planning to overcome this belief or the shadow aspect of the story that said you're rejected, you're not going to be understood. In order to be understood, you have to be valued as the savior. So make yourself the savior. And that story is going to fail because no one's going to worship you for your sacrifice. And that's going to be a hard thing to understand. And so what that means is to participate in the resurrection is not to insist on the outcome of the crucifixion being that you have a king and a kingdom. Like if Jesus was like, this is another movement, you know, we're using Jesus as a story because it's so easy with the martyr-savior myth. You know, if Jesus was like, okay, you know, I'm not going to get, I'm this crucifixion, I'm not going to give it up. I am not going to accept this. I'm going to tell the angels that I want my kingdom and I want my crown and I want everybody to say, oh, that guy, the preacher, he was right. He kept on saying the kingdom of heaven was coming and the people were saying he's the Messiah. He's like, if he was like, I'm going to be the Messiah and I'm going to be the king of all and everything's going to be perfect because I made it to the kingdom and now I'm king. I mean, a lot of people are still waiting for that. But the point is that's like empire. That's hierarchy. That's antithetical to cooperation in a bigger story that says like we're in an ecosystem, not just as individuals, but as planets. And the universe is much bigger than any story that we've been told about what God is. And that universe includes a lot more than just us. We are just a species. That's true. We're just one species. We're not the most important only. That was going to be a story that would have to be sacrificed and crucified in order for us to see a bigger picture that includes the majesty of the universe and all that exists within that universe that we are part of. And again, the coherence of being a part of an ecosystem that in and of itself is a closed system somehow, that God. And so that's where, like, we, you know, when we've been saying that a lot, but the warrior here says, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot for you to forgive the crucifixion. It's going to take a lot for you to forgive that the story that you were told, that being the Messiah also leads to being the king, and that everybody appreciates it, and we're so happy that it's a happy ending. We have to forgive the stories in our life where we gave it all, where we were 100% enthusiastic. And we also have to look at a pattern where we're putting 100% enthusiasm on something in story form that is very spiritual, that doesn't exist in the day-to-day. Deifying a story or deifying a person, whatever that false god ends up being, it will end up being a disappointment because it's just a story. But that doesn't mean that the part of you that, like, is magically thinking is necessarily leading you wrong. It's just that that process is a technology of spiritual art, and it's not how you use your will to maneuver something forward. Manifest, manifest, manifest. That's not it. And so with the Creator and, like, the Tower and the Six of Pentacles, you know, you are meant to create something that is lasting. You are meant to have these relationships where you're seen clearly and understood, but not as the savior of everybody in order to be. You don't need to be adored and worshipped, you know, for all of that specialness and, like, and seen clearly in all of the colors of your perfection from the other people around you in order to feel like you can, like, have the things that you're meant to create be, like, where there's reciprocity with the give and take. For there to be give and take and reciprocity with your give and take, the Tower here is not building a foundation on the stone that nothing good happens and that you might as well just, like, live in your head. And by live in your head, I want to be so careful about that, because there's the spiritual technology and the magic that you have access to is going to operate around magical thinking and disassociation. And these things are seen as only being in existence related to, like, certain types of dysfunction and removing yourself from the world. But all mystics use the technology of disassociation to enter states and see things and interact with things that are in other realms. It's a tool and it's the way. It's not a dysfunction. It can be used dysfunctionally. Tarot cards are a tool that can be used in a dysfunctional way. Channeling is a tool that can be a dysfunctional process. Sermons where you see all the charisma, that charisma, like, it's a spiritual technology that you can use to beguile people, or you can use it because it's channeling. It's actually, like, it's what happens when you're channeling. What are you channeling though? What agenda are you channeling? What energies are you channeling? You're going to be channeling the energies on the end of the archetypal story that you're in, that you have access to because of the depth of field that you naturally have. And we're always channeling energies that are where we are, because we're working our way through where we are into a new place. And to get there, we have to move through where we are. And so learning to channel or learning to work with your magic in any of its forms, whether you're channeling or word weaving or, you know, there are all of the tools that we're meant to use. Using them right comes from having pure intention. Pure intention is not about pushing your agenda on another person. Pushing the agenda of the story that you want to have and live through with another person, with a kind of job, with a certain status, on the rest of the world, and then the punishing stone heart because it doesn't come true. That's, like, hurts, right? Like, that's like a sharp kind of moment. But that's where we have, like, this tower needs to fall around certain habits operating with the wrong intention. And so, like, all of this giftedness that it comes in, like, it's collective wide, and there's, like, no one doing it right or wrong. We're all feeling our way through the dark and learning what it is, even to, like, what is a human? What is consciousness? Like, what is the spirit realm? What is a God? What are, you know, like, we have been left without our histories. We've been left with our connection to our ancestral, like, you know, wealth of knowledge. And we need a certain grace feeling our way through in the dark. And there are going to be people who stumble their way through first and then are able to kind of show people what they've learned along the way and make it a little easier to figure out, well, you know, you pick it up and you hold it and you see that it's a knob and it opens the door. Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Well, I got there first. I can tell you my experience. I don't know what you're going to do with the door, but this is how we communicate and bring each other through the process of rediscovery. That's not the same thing as selling a story and needing it to be right for everybody because it's right for you. And if it's not right for everybody, that invalidates it for you. And now what are we going to do? We have a power struggle. We're not power struggling. And so doing it right or wrong is not really what it is. It's every tool you enter not really knowing how to use it, and you get bit in the ass enough of the time, like doing it wrong, to figure out how to do it right, because absent a book, that's what we're dealing with. Absent a book that tells us what to do, and feeling our way through a dark room, we have to have grace, because even communicating about spirituality from a place of spiritual authority has been banned and held. We have not been able to communicate honestly as divine feminine energies or in a divine feminine spiritual space, openly, honestly, with our voice in hundreds of years. Hundreds of years we have not been able to communicate honestly about this stuff. So communicating honestly these gifts is going to be a rocky, fumbly process for everyone. And what we need to do is not need to be right or wrong, just communicate from our open heart. And so that's what this creator is about in terms of reciprocity, being given, like, having this experience of Two of Cups, seeing clearly and being understood. And then being able to throw out that story that says that you have to be the savior to be properly, like, you have to show up in such a, show up as, like, it's so hard. This is so different for everybody. The way that this expresses in each individual is like remarkably different, but it's some form of I'm the savior here, one way or another. And some of it's right, some of for the right cause, for the right person, for the right religion, for the right belief system, sure. But when we're talking about this myth, you're serving a story, right? And so when we stop serving that story and we realize, basically, this is where we have this notion of the crucifixion of, like, what was lost is I did everything. I gave my life for it. All the way enthusiasm. Everything was given to that. And it wasn't appreciated at all. I was crucified giving all of that. I was left with nothing. So how do you resurrect? That story failed you with the tower here. Now what do we build with? Do we stay with the stone heart? Just planning to have a relationship one day? Planning to interact like that? Planning to be seen or heard someday? Being seen or heard by spirit? But just that's Two of Wands and Two of Cups. Planning for this encounter, but the heart is stone. It doesn't exist. The story failed about being seen in that light for all that you did. And so now, in order to get give and take, proper reciprocity related to what it is that you create and bring into the world, proper sight, proper appreciation. The womb here is something that's like incubating a little bit. So let's get into it. Knight of Cups. And the Page of Cups. And the Knight of Swords, King of Cups, and the Two of Pentacles. Five of Cups is this grief. So we have to, when we have a situation where the magical thinking, which is not a bad thing, it's like it leads you. So dream interpretation, right? So like we lost all of our spiritual technology. We don't even know what this stuff is. A lot of it's been demonized. Let's face it, it's the world we live in. So magical thinking, what you have to understand about the spirit realm is everything is disclosed in symbols. All that is channeled through And the reason why you're only able to channel from the vantage point that you have based on where you are in the archetypal story of your understanding is because your mind, think of your mind as like a library. What channels through you has to have access to what you comprehend, understand, have language for, and even like, you know, have like your flimsy little consciousness is all that a God has to bring sense from nonsense through. And they don't have the universe's library, because you're not going to understand the universe's library. They have to use the library of what's in your mind and take what's in your mind and use it to help you see. And that means they have to take their language, which is not our language, and try to find a way to like bring it into our language. And like a friend of mine had a dream, and I don't think she'll mind if I use this example because it's really broad. But I was talking to her about this. When you're little and you are half asleep, or even when you're an adult, whenever you're half asleep, and say you're half asleep and you hear a clock ticking in the background, tick, 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 tick. And that ends up in your dream as someone playing a drum, tick, 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 tick. So what's happening in the world of your waking life is interpreted by the world of your sleeping life as something making a sound like in meter, right? So it's something that is making a sound in meter. It's a clock in your waking life, and it's a drum in your sleeping life. That's the symbolic language, like how it comes through. That's why I talk in metaphor most of the time. So when we are seeing that the magical thinking as a spiritual technology is meant to be interpreted like a dream, it's not meant for you to impose that dream on the reality of somebody who, or something that you have a belief that you are or want, or you know what I mean? Like the magical thinking is never going to be true to what you are magically thinking. It is going to be true symbolically. When you're when you're channeling messages, it's true symbolically. How you make sense of it and bring it through, it's true symbolically. Religious syncretism, the God of love in one religious, the God of love in another, like symbolically it works around the stories where love is represented. And so when we are, don't damn yourself for magical thinking and being like, I'm just no good and I'm never going to get anything because I don't participate, because I don't, and rejection and black stone heart. Nope. And stop being so attached to whatever the story. Like that pain is twofold. That pain is the story isn't true, and therefore I am broken, and my story making doesn't work, and I don't know how to have intuition. That's one way. And that's one half of it. And the other half of it is like hurt, like really legitimate hurt, because you were in love with the story and that story broke your heart, and the person associated with might have nothing to do with it, or might have something to do with it. That cause might have something to do with it, might not have something to do with it. That religion might have something to do with it. It doesn't matter. You're angry here. There's vengeance. There's disappointment, because that enthusiasm was all the way up. And so for you to move into this place of actively from authenticity, creating a life in co-creation with spirit, where that reciprocity can really come in, you first have to say, I'm going to forgive that my hope, my dream, everything that I put in it was crucified. I'm going to forgive that story of crucifixion over everything that I sacrificed myself for. And I'm going to step into this. I have to go back to the seed. What was the magical thinking about? What was that telling me? I needed to interpret it like a dream, not like something that was literal. What was the myth that I was participating with? I need to go back and I need to look at the seed of that story, and I have to see what the seeds and the symbols in that story were, because that's probably, this is where the magic works, telling me the truth about what I'm supposed to be looking for and where I'm supposed to be going. It's leading me, it's beckoning me, it's calling me. These are energies that are trying to get my attention and want to move me through this archetypal story into a place of ascension with it, which means that I'm going to encounter these energies and channel, this information along the way, and it's going to be a learning process. So you have to not throw out your dreams that didn't come to pass, but go back and scavenger hunt, go into the rubble, What was I actually looking for? I was looking for someone to see me clearly. I was looking to be properly valued. I was looking to like be accepted without having to work really hard for it, as the accommodating savior of the room moment. Because that savior role can even just be a tendency to accommodate everyone else's mood. You know, like it really does go into people pleasing very broadly. And so the womb is like, you know, that natural ability to heal can be what that dream was all about. But then it didn't work out working at an abusive doctor's office. And so, but you're a natural healer. That dream to be on stage that didn't work out doesn't mean that you aren't a shaman. In antiquity, who had audiences? It was people who were practicing the spiritual arts because they had something to share about the other worlds. So maybe it didn't work out as a story where you were an actor and got an award and you gave it all for that. But so don't throw out this notion that the dreaming was for nothing when the dreaming was saying, oh, no. Lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, you've been a shaman, you've been a guru, you've been a high priestess. You've always had an audience when you're talking from conveying the dreams that come through that you channel. So the seed of the magical thinking of the shadow end of the archetype, the story was meant to be encountered. But moving from the false, the counterfeit aspect of the story, what wasn't true, what wasn't meant for you, what wasn't yours about this, and into what is, and how it would naturally express, how you are part of the co-creation of the universe, that you do have a place that is accepted, that everything about your giftedness and the magical way that you think is valuable for a purpose. The seed is right. It is leading you, it is telling you, but you're listening to it not with demands and I insist, and then it doesn't happen and now I'm devastated, but with there's something about these energies and the alchemy of that person or that situation that is calling me towards my destiny, and I want to begin to embark on that journey, and with my hand open from an interpretive place with the influence of spirit, because this is how the magic of my mind works to bring me forward. And I accept myself and I love myself. And I know that this is part of my giftedness and not something that I need to condemn as an insufficient something. And I'm not going to condemn it in other people because I had to kill it in myself. And so with the womb here being about the Knight of Cups, the Page of Cups, the Knight of Swords, the Two of Pentacles, and the King of Cups. Last week we talked about the dominant myth of the happily ever after, which said that only in a community where all of the needs are met can we have romantic love be a healthy thing. Otherwise, we have to negotiate this sacred thing with all kinds of other aspects of life that end up kind of like asking too much of it in one way or another. It was a horrible thing to kind of encounter, but like basically it said, you know, first we have to get rid of that which the myth limits and ends up being insufficient and untrue in order to participate in really valuing community, so that there can be like a healthy place for types of love to exist in relationship, like, you know, to the whole whatever. Like we have to get rid of the happily ever after in order to have a happily day to day, where we're not constantly waiting until after we get that perfect relationship in order to be happy. It had to be crucified for the reality of a day-to-day life that is pleasant and not made up of you know, story arcs that are highs and lows that validate that the love story is still functioning as you know, romantic epic, when it's supposed to just turn into like a very comfortable meandering. That's what asking too much of a story. And so when we see this womb and, you know, and we say, okay, you know, what I was born with in the way of inspiration, and what I was born with in the way of giftedness, and the story that I was born to overcome in the way of like not being seen and heard clearly, certainly I have a message that's meant to come through, that I'm supposed to communicate and be seen and heard clearly, because I've been driven all my life by that need. But that message doesn't have to be, I sacrificed my life in order for you to value me properly. In one way or another, it's something completely different. And so, and that can be a fame thing. I sacrificed everything in order to have this, the value of a huge audience, instead of just I sing and it's good. And everybody who knows me knows that my voice is healing. You see the difference between a gift and a story? And the way that the story can tell the gift that it's not worth anything, even though the gift is there for your life, creative purposes, expression, authenticity, praise. And so this is this notion of, we go back to for that resurrection, to actually experience our rightful place in divinity and to begin and transform into something completely new. We forgive that crucifixion. We understand that that it was a necessary part of the story of transformation that we're embarking on in, and we see the situation as a gift instead of our death. And that's this Knight of Cups, is this offer of love that comes in, Page of Cups, you know, with a new love. There's a new innocence that can be had once you understand that you didn't go through all of that for nothing. That when we enter into this story and we participate in this story in this way, and it's dialed all the way up with this, like, you know, it's an alchemy of self, soul, that crucifixion is going to be really hard, but you can't stay there. The resurrection is about a new beginning, a transformation, and coming back into a place of feeling like the divine has love to give you. And you're expecting it because you saw that dream was all about love. The story has to be crucified, but that dream is true. This is an acceptance and a validation that you get, that doesn't come from a story coming true, but comes from a fact of seeing, oh, wait a minute, there's this other aspect here. So that when you take action, you do understand that there's a balance that has to be struck here with this Five of Cups and the new influences in the Wanderlust, you know, and that King of Cups and that Two of Pentacles. Everything about this movement would have set you up with a depth of field, you know, love to the bottom of the ocean. Enthusiasm dialed all the way up, disappointment, depth of fields to the bottom of the ocean. And then the isolation with that King of Cups, this balance that you've come to. That leads us to this resurrection. When we recognize that the seed of what we had hoped for isn't being denied to us, but rather given to us in a different story, we can joyfully anticipate what that story might be. What's the story that we are intended for? What is our actual intended instead of our expected? And so when we look at the resurrection, let's do that. Let's pull some cards on that. We are at 111. I'm going to stop us here, and I'm probably going to put this in parts.